A story that my mom likes to tell is that one time when I was young, maybe 4 or 5, she took me to the neighborhood pool. And a woman came up to her and said, "Well, it's nice that you get her out." And my mom is over here like, she didn't say anything, but she's thinking like, what am I supposed to do with her? Keep her in a closet or,
I'm Jenna.
I'm Ashley, and we're Reverends.
Revs on the road. Hop in the car with us and come along for the ride.
As we step out of the pulpit and see what God is up to in the world.
We're not leaving the church.
We're just finding it in all kinds of beautiful places.
This week, we hit the road to North Carolina, where we find Reverend Bekah Rhea living into her calling as a disability rights activist and just a generally badass human. Revs on the Road is sponsored by the Pastoral Residency Program at Wilshire Baptist Church in Dallas.
The Big D.
The residency is part of Wilshire's Pathways to Ministry initiative. It provides recent seminary or divinity school graduates with 2 years of practical ministry and learning inside the church.
Residents,
like us,
are full-time ministers who preach, teach, and gain experience in all areas of church life.
Learn more about the Wilshire Pastoral Residency,
including how to apply,
at wilshirebc.org.
WILSHIREBC, wilshirebc.org. We are back on the road.
Back on the road, baby.
Where have you been this week, Jen?
Well, I've really been on the road. I was in Panama City Beach, Florida, and I went on a solo vacation.
Oh, vacation with yourself.
Which was pretty empowering. Like I think it was really good for me to, how much I love being around people and hanging out, and, being quiet for 4 days with myself was actually really healing and fun and
empowering. How did that work out for you? Who did you talk to? That's what I need to know first. I need to know who you talked to.
I talked to a lot of people. I talked to the owners of the Airbnb. I stayed in a 1981 vintage Airstream, which gave me so many aesthetic vibes that made me happy. I talked to the owners. I talked to, made friends on the beach. I talked to people in the airport. And I really loved how meaningful even those brief encounters with people can be, and just how interesting. When I was on my way back, I actually was sitting next to this kid that had never taken a flight before. And so when we were landing, he grabs me and he's like, "Oh my God, is it okay?" And because if you've never felt a plane land,
a lot of noises.
If you've never felt a plane land, you're kind of scared. So that was a hoot. And yeah, I had a blast, and it was really restorative for me.
So are you sold on solo vacationing? Is this something you're going to do again? Or...
Yeah, I would definitely do it again. I think it kind of depends on like what your energy needs. I think for this one, it was really good for me because I was so needing a rest that if I would have been with a friend, like I would have not rested in the way that I did just by myself. I literally laid on the beach and watched movies and ate ice cream and did whatever I wanted to do. And I do think it's an experience that everybody should try, and because I think we just really need to practice aloneness, and we need to practice being quiet with ourselves, and sort of owning that as a woman is kind of fun, it's kind of fun to be like, I don't have to wait until the timing is right and waiting on everyone else. And I was talking to my mom, actually. She was like, "Yeah, Jen, like I was 28 when I started taking trips with you, and she had me, she was a single mom with me, but like I think this is the age where you kind of just realize, okay, I either wait until my friends are available at the time I am, or I just go." And so I just did it, and it was empowering to survive.
You did.
I grilled. I cooked things.
You cooked with fire.
I cooked with fire. I was very calm, even though grills are scary. But I think I'm going to get a grill for the summer so we can grill out.
And how many times did you act out Little Mermaid or Moana?
I felt like Moana the whole time. Like I had some very Moana moments where I looked out into the water and reconnected with my purpose and power, and you know exactly how serious I am about that. Like
100%.
Like I reconnected with like, okay, we can do this. So
yes.
What did you do while I was gone?
I worked and had one day of staycation. I had a friend come in town to visit, and on my off day, I have learned to protect my off days with everything in me. They are sacred. And so I decided to have a staycation off day. So there's a fun little app where you can rent people's pools.
Wow, and only you could find this. I just want to say only Ashley Robinson could find an app where you rent pools.
So we rented a beautiful pool and spent an afternoon in this little oasis in Dallas. It was gorgeous.
Wow.
And I had my first experience with something. With a serpent.
Oh my god!
I still have flashbacks to it. It's still. I have
It's
never.
lingering.
I still get chills. I've never seen a snake in real life outside of the zoo.
Wow! I wish I would have been there for this.
I'm a southern girl, but I'm not a country girl. I'm an indoorsy person.
You ain't from the Delta, baby.
No, and I'm indoorsy. Indoorsy.
Indoors.
Thank you. We were in this beautiful pool, this beautiful oasis that had just gardens and just beautiful flowers everywhere. My friend was sitting on the steps, and I see this thing that my brain knew was a snake, but my mouthpiece couldn't make out, and so I just looked at her and said, "Ah!" and pulled her towards me and turned her around.
Oh my gosh!
And she said, "Oh yeah, that's a snake."
Oh my gosh!
And when it was a baby, it was about 8 inches long. And when she said that, I immediately started screaming bloody murder.
Were there tears?
There immediately were also sobbing tears. It was a sob scream. It was a sob scream situation. The owner of the pool, who was inside working from home, came running out and he said, "That doesn't sound like a good scream." And all I could do was point and cry and scream at this little tiny baby snake, who at one point, to be fair, was swimming at me.
Oh wow!
I didn't realize that they swam.
Oh, you didn't know snakes swam?
No, and that just changes
Everything.
everything about how awful they are. And so he just reached in with his bare hand and grabbed it and just said, "Oh, it's just a little garden snake." And he picked up the little baby snake and took it to the corner of his yard and put it back in the grass. And
oh my gosh!
that was my time at that pool. I think I was done at that moment.
Wow!
You know, I realized that I had also been having dreams of snakes. And so someone had mentioned in passing that it's actually kind of a good omen and a good luck. So I looked up a dream guide, and it can be good luck. And snakes can represent transformation and rebirth, which is probably why they're so terrifying.
Yeah.
So it makes a lot of sense.
I love that.
Yeah.
So we both had big weeks.
Big weeks. Big first encounter.
Big water weeks.
Yeah. So we are headed this week to visit with a friend, Reverend Bekah Rhea, in North Carolina. And
Carolina, your southern
my
came
southern
out
is
there.
coming out. It does. Occasionally comes out. Who
am I to talk though? Really,
Miss Arkansas.
I'm so Arkansas.
Arkansasy.
Arkansas.
When does your Arkansasy come out? Because I'll tell you when my.
Well, I'll tell you what. I was at the RV park this weekend with my family, and there was a intoxicated person at the pool who was probably like Miley Cyrus's distant relative. Like it was like Miley's cousin was having some bourbon at the pool, and she kept asking for my Cheez-Its. And I felt an inner Arkansas Baptist preacher RV park pool part of me that I didn't know existed. But I told her,
Did you share?
No. No, you are not going to be inebriated and ask me for Cheez-Its on my RV park property.
I feel like that was kind of like body of Christ in the Cheez-Its, though.
Oh, is it though? Do we have to give Cheez-Its to every inebriated person we see?
The Revs on the Road podcast is powered along by Good Faith Media. Learn more at goodfaithmedia.org.
Ride along with the Revs on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Revs on the Road.
And hey, give us a honk by liking the podcast on your favorite platform. We're going to have a little red light rant, and that is going to be a moment where we take a pause and we just have a rant, like one does when you're at a red light and you're practicing an argument. What you might say to someone, and
another thing.
And another thing,
and this,
and by the way, and did you think about
that?
This? And this point, So today, to go along with our interview with Bekah, we are going to red light rant about accessibility. Go for it, Jen.
You know what? I just think it's ridiculous that our spaces are not created in ways that reflect the full diversity of human bodies.
Yes.
Like, why is it that, you know, Sunday school rooms, the old school traditional Sunday school setup is there's a lectern or a sort of desk at the front where the person stands. And what that does is it says, you know what, to be a Sunday school teacher, it's assumed that you can stand up. You know what, to be a preacher, it's assumed you can stand at the pulpit.
Is the pulpit accessible?
Oh,
not always. No. And the way that we have it set up, no, it's not.
It's not.
It's not accessible physically for a lot of people. It's not accessible emotionally. Accessibility means a lot of things. And, you know, in talking about Sunday school, and another thing, if you're thinking about people standing up in front of you, you're also assuming that people are able to look up and listen. And so there's so many avenues. But what I want to know in accessibility and thinking about spaces even outside of the church that we go to every day, I've been thinking about accessibility since our conversation with Bekah. Who is the perfect person that the world is designed for? Who is it? Because I have never met that person. And certainly some of those people.
Well, I would say a white man, an able-bodied white cis gendered.
It's like
ABCD.
That checks off all the privilege lists. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's just, I mean, heck, I was trying to get back from, you know, on my airplane and had to run all over to get my bag, and it did my mind did cross, you know, if you weren't able to run around, I mean, our world just isn't built for that. And what is it going to take for us to reshape our structures to be more accessible? Because that says to a person, oh, you are an add-on. You are something, you're an afterthought.
Right.
Literally an afterthought to our architecture. Like, by the way, we had to add you in. You know? And what is it going to take for us to say, you're not an afterthought. You're an integral part of humanity, and our spaces.
We want you here. What that tells us, what that tells those individuals who, for spaces not easily accessible, is that we don't want you here. We don't care if you're here or not. And it's hard to be out in public and see those spaces, to be in restaurants and schools and grocery stores and places we go everywhere. and to see places that are not accessible. But to be a minister and to be in churches and to see spaces that are not accessible.
It also, you know, when if someone was to get up in the pulpit, like, it draws attention to their disability rather than what they have to say, you know, rather than what if we had an accessible pulpit? What if we had ramps and even just ease around the pulpit, like where you didn't feel you could access it with ease, you know, what would that communicate?
And I've thought about, and another thing on this rant energy is that I've thought about accessibility beyond physical accessibility, emotional accessibility in our churches and in our spaces, and what it means for different populations who have been marginalized. We say all are welcome. We say all bodies and all people are welcome, but is our space accessible? If we say, yes, we want those experiencing homelessness to be welcome and loved in our pews, but is our space accessible to them? Think about how hard it is to get on public transportation on Sunday. Think about the fact that they might be hungry. Can you sit through a worship service with your stomach growling and starving? No, that's not an accessible space for them. Would you want to come to a worship service and not have a change of clothes? I personally would not. That is not accessible. Think about different avenues of mental health and neurodivergence. Is the Sunday morning bright lights, loud music setting accessible
Sensory.
to all forms of neurodivergence? No. We don't always think about these things, and we need to be more aware of them. And we need to be more aware of who's not here. Who are we casting out just by making our spaces accessible to those who fit the mold, or to making our spaces built for the perfect person, the norm.
Yes. And you know what? This is something that Bekah is really going to touch on, but you know, the counter argument is, well, most people can walk. Most people can da-da-da-da. Well, okay. When you're 91, let me know how that's going for you.
Right.
I mean, I don't say that with a spirit of meanness, but I say it with, we all are going to approach a time in our lives when our bodies will fail in the ways that society deems that they should not fail.
Right.
And so we're all going to need more accessibility at some point. And it's, again, that paradigm shift of really changing our spaces so that it's not for the disabled. It's really for
Everyone. And what I've noticed is that in the very short time that I live with an autoimmune disorder that gives me muscle weakness and extreme muscle pain. And in the short time that I've had this, I have learned that I've had to advocate for myself. And I've kind of made mental notes of places that are easy for me to go and harder for me to go. And advocating for yourself is exhausting. And at some point, you just don't go places if you know that it's clear that you're not welcome there because of the way that it's built. They make it clear by the way they have built their space. They don't care if you're there or not. They could care less.
the afterthought.
And so it's the advocating, you know, more people will say, well, we wish we knew. Advocate for yourself. Well, you know, do you know how exhausting it is to always advocate for yourself?
How long is it going to fall on the marginalized community to get the job, to get the work changed?
Exactly.
You know,
Yes.
I mean, from you know, how is it going to take only queer people to get queer rom-coms and queer movies? I mean, hey, I'm bringing it in a different layer here.
Right.
But,
No,
like,
but
it's just how long does it fall to the quote minority to
or the marginalized
to change the culture?
Yeah.
Like, that's a bigger
Yeah. No, I get it. And so my eyes are open now. Thank you to Bekah, and thank you to, you know, part of my own experience of having to advocate for myself and my needs, of always looking for what's accessible and what's not. And it speaks volumes.
It does.
When your space is open to all, truly open to all. So we will hear more from Reverend Bekah Rhea in this episode.
It's going to be so good. You know what, Ashley?
What?
We're getting low on gas.
And it's expensive.
Yep, but we've got help. Let's fuel up with this word from our sponsors.
Second Baptist Church in downtown Little Rock recognizes the God-given gifts and graces in women clergy, just like Jenna and Ashley. And we believe the way of Jesus demands courageous conversations like the ones you're hearing. Second Baptist Little Rock is a proud sponsor of this work. Check us out at 2bclr.com.
I'm Reverend Starlette Thomas, a womanist in ministry and the host of the Raceless Gospel podcast from Good Faith Media. It's season 2, and we're still talking about that taboo trinity: race, religion, and politics. This season of the Raceless Gospel has 8 episodes, 8 podcast church services. The doors at this church are open, and we're going to talk about the sticks and stones we carry faithfully that break the skin and bones of Christ's body. And on each episode, we're joined by those who bring perspective and insight as to how we set these broken bones and perhaps make things right. The Raceless Gospel Podcast. 8 episodes released every Sunday beginning July 18th. I'm your podcast pastor, Reverend Starlette Thomas. Join us as we discuss the church in North America's bodywork. Learn more at goodfaithmedia.org.
I'm Reverend Jenna.
And I'm Reverend Ashley.
We're Revs on the road, and we're back on the road after a pit stop, headed this week to North Carolina, and we're almost there. We're so happy to talk with Bekah. Reverend Bekah Rhea is a disabled theologian, writer, and community development practitioner whose work is derived from her personal experience and ongoing dialogue with the divine. Bekah holds BAs in theater and world religions from Gardner-Webb University, and she is a graduate of McAfee's MDiv program. She is also a development associate with Repairs of the Breach in North Carolina, and we're so excited to have you with us, Bekah.
Yes, Bekah, thank you for coming along for the ride today. Tell us where you are on your journey today.
Physically, I am in my apartment in Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm actually going to move soon, but just like across the road, because this is a student apartment and I am not a student.
Yes.
So you never know what you're going to get. Right now I'm playing a game of, is it thunder or my upstairs neighbors?
Or bowling. Maybe it's bowling.
Yeah, that's, sometimes, I think yesterday it sounded like they were rollerblading up there, so I just never know.
You never know. Wow. So you're in North Carolina and went to McAfee and recently graduated. Tell us about your call into theological education, what got you there. Tell us about it.
Sure. So I've always been kind of a pensive, angsty person. I don't know if y'all do the Enneagram.
Yes.
But I'm a 4. I'm a 4 on the Enneagram.
A fellow 4. I'm so excited. I've been pensive and angsty forever, and I've never known how to describe it.
Jenna, you have a fellow 4.
Oh, I love that. Okay. This is
Yeah.
her time.
So, and I didn't think I was a 4 at first because all the descriptions that you read just describe the 4 as a terrible,
they're awful.
Self-centered person.
It's
and
like
I'm like,
Edgar
well,
Allan
I'm not.
Poe, and like
Yeah,
you're in a
yeah,
dark
yeah.
basement, and we're all just like crying all day. Which that's true, but we take breaks from crying.
And my one of my former college roommates was like, well, I think you need to read this, and it was the description of the 4 as a child. And that was when I really realized, like, oh wow, I do fit the description of a 4. Because I've always had that sense of I'm just the lonely angsty kid over here.
Yes.
And part of that was disability, and part of that was, again, my disposition. I'm sure that if I were not disabled, I may have found something to be angsty about. But as a kid, my public school, when I was in elementary school, they tried so hard to be accommodating that it was almost isolating. So, for example, they noticed that when I was sitting at my desk in the 4th grade that my feet did not touch the floor. So they got me a shorter desk so my feet would touch the floor and I'd be at correct posture, whatever. But then my desk is a good at least 1 foot, if not 2 feet shorter than my neighbor's, right? And that's just one, I think, very good visual example of sometimes places try so hard to be inclusive that it actually ends up excluding and isolating, especially with children, more, because the other side of the coin is that my disability, cerebral palsy, comes in many forms. And so for some people, it does affect their cognitive ability. For some people, it affects their entire body. For me, it primarily affects my lower body. So cognitively, I don't have a lot of delays. I have ADD and anxiety and depression, but most of that is genetic anyway. It's just exacerbated by disability status. And so a lot of my childhood was, my parents would say things like, well, at least you have control of your bladder. At least you can be in the regular class at school. But then there would be things like, well, they're giving me a shorter desk, and I still had to ride the short bus, as it was colloquially known, right? My parents asked if I could ride the regular bus, and they said no, just because they were worried about how I would get in and out of it. There's just a lot of, and this is like early 2000s, and we have to remember the ADA is not that old. The ADA is only a little older than I am. The ADA is like 31, 32.
Wow,
and I'm
it's that young.
25.
Wow. Okay.
Yes. So the movement started in the 60s and 70s, but the ADA wasn't signed until the 1980s.
Wow.
And so disabled people were in institutions up until the 1980s.
Wow.
And so over the past 20, 30 years, you can see kind of this scramble as people try to get used to seeing disabled people out and about instead of hidden away. A story that my mom likes to tell is that one time when I was young, maybe 4 or 5, she took me to the neighborhood pool, and a woman came up to her and said, well, it's nice that you get her out. And my mom is over here like, she didn't say anything, but she's thinking like, what am I supposed to do with her? Keep her in a closet, or but the reality is, like, that was reality for most disabled people until fairly recently. And so I also grew up in kind of a privileged aspect of my father was a doctor, and my mother studied special education before she became a mother. And so both of my parents were kind of uniquely prepared for the situation at hand. So I've done research. In college, I did a research project called, Does This Wheelchair Make Me Look Dead? And it was all about That's always fun at a research conference when you go in and you're at the coffee hour and everyone says, "Oh, what's your presentation about?" And you can be like, "Well, my presentation is about how you think I am already dead."
Way to start a conversation. I love it.
Exactly. But the research showed that parents of disabled children, and you'll notice this in all the research is done on the families, or from the perspective of the families, from the perspective of the doctor, rather than the perspective of the person. But the research shows that parents of disabled children will go through those stages of grief. Because a lot of parents of disabled children will spend a lot of time in that bargaining stage. And the stages of grief are fluid and not at all linear, but parents will spend a lot of time trying to alleviate their child's pain or to make life better for them. And most parents don't know if a treatment is experimental or, for me, it was a lot of suggesting surgeries that would look good in the short run, but in the long run, I would just have to have the same surgery again, right? But a lot of parents don't have that knowledge. So my parents were kind of uniquely equipped in that they knew that they could say no to things and it wouldn't be, a detriment to my health.
Right.
Or what have you. And that doesn't mean my upbringing was not at all perfect, but I think that it was a very unique situation, and I'm blessed to have the parents that I did. That being said, I still internalize a lot of that.
Yeah, sure.
When you're a young child and you're trying to figure out, why is it hard for me to socialize with people, right? You're automatically going to go to, because there's something different about me. That must be why people don't like me, right?
Yeah.
When it could absolutely be something else. Like sometimes little kids are just mean,
This is all such
but I think
fodder for the four, though.
Yeah.
This is such recipe, like what you're describing for becoming the four. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. And so even at like a really young age, I was sitting there and being like, well, I'm different from all of these people. And
yeah.
And so I handled that in a lot of different ways. But the reality is when you can't be on the monkey bars or playing kickball or what have you, I spent a lot of time just observing things.
Yeah.
And observing people.
Wow.
And I started writing when I was 9. I would carry around a notebook. I'd read the book Harriet the Spy, and I wanted to be like Harriet the Spy, so I started carrying around a notebook.
That's iconic.
From there, it's just developed into this whole thing of like I started reading and writing really early. I could read by the time I was 4.5.
Wow.
My parents were going to wait to put me in kindergarten, and then I could read. And they're like, well, I guess it's better.
Yeah, let's go ahead and let her go. She's already reading. Tell us in your little notebook, your Harriet the Spy notebook, what were you processing even from a young age and about who God is and your theology? How has that been shaped by disability and how have you processed that?
Yeah, so I grew up in a Christian family. A church-going family, and I'm one of 5 children. So when you have that many kids, you're looking for as many activities as possible, wholesome activities to occupy all of these children. So church was one way to do that. And so, we grew up going to church every Sunday and every Wednesday night, and basically any other night that the doors were open to us. And I started asking questions really early because I could see that people would tell me that Jesus could heal people, and I could read in the New Testament that Jesus could heal people. And so I was already, like, from the age of 7, I'm having arguments with God because I'm seeing healing narratives in the New Testament, and I'm saying, well, when is it my turn? Because it says right here that you heal people. And so I spent a lot of my angsty time kind of fighting with God and fighting with myself. I think if you look back on my journals, it's a lot of what I've found to be true of my friends who also grew up in kind of a conservative evangelical environment. It's a lot of shame, a lot of trying to do better. Because the other thing is I thrive off of external approval. And so that's part of why I function so well in academia, and part of why I have so many darn degrees is because it's a great way to get good feedback.
I feel you.
Especially when you're good at what they want you to be good at in academia.
Right.
And so for me, that was another way to have that external approval. And I think at some point, something I took pride in, because I could say that my body didn't work, but my brain did. Which, that's probably in this day and age kind of intra-ableist or whatever the term would be. But I think as a young child, that was something that I hung on to. And so I was from a very young age having these conversations with God. I was not satisfied with any of the answers I was given. But as I got older, that kind of self-loathing attitude, it seeps in, and it became about more than just my body, right? I was diagnosed with depression when I was 14, and I probably should have been diagnosed much, much sooner. And so that kind of spurred my basis for my suspicion of the church. Because up until that point, I was the good church girl. I went to church anytime it was open. I volunteered. I did the puppet ministry.
Puppets,
I did.
Yes.
Oh, man.
Oh, the puppets.
That's a whole other can of worms. But I did
need
the
like
puppet ministry.
Ooh, that's a detour.
That is
I don't know if I'm ready for that one. Never. I don't know about
and
that.
we'll come back to the puppets, actually.
Okay, let's come
The
back.
puppets actually became very important. And so I was doing the puppet ministry. Church is where I actually first got into theater. My best friend in high school, his parents run a Christian theater company in Knoxville called the Word Players. And so they were my
Ashley,
acting
you would
teachers.
love that. Right. Ashley would love that. Okay, continue. Sorry.
Yeah, they were my acting teachers growing up. And I think as a kid, you're always trying to find that thing that you're good at.
Yes.
On TV shows, there's always that one episode where there's a kid who hasn't found their talent or their thing yet. And they're so mad because all their friends have a thing. I used to identify with that character. It was that character, and then, I don't know if you guys remember, but kids' TV shows used to always have an episode where something fell in like a very small place, and the only person who could get it was the very tiny person in the front group. Who up until that point in the episode, they've just been like ignored or whatever, but then suddenly like someone loses their keys and the short person's the only one that can help them. Those were the characters I identified with as a child, and so I was trying to find my thing. Because I couldn't do a sport, that doesn't mean I didn't try. My dad, bless his soul, had me trying every other sport that my siblings did. So it wasn't for lack of trying, but I didn't have a sport. At the time, and again, my inner 4 comes out, I decided I wasn't good at art, because that was what my sister did. And I didn't want to do the same thing.
You can't take what a sibling's doing. Well, yeah. This middle child did.
You have to be unique. She
had to be.
Oh, yeah. There's no... Yeah, I get that. Wow.
So I got into drama through our church, and that was what stuck with me through all of high school, and then of course of college, because I insisted on double majoring. And by the time I decided to go to seminary, I had too much of the theater major done, so there's no point changing.
Never too much theater. Never, ever.
No. So I latched on to that as my thing, but I think the theme is, constantly looking for this sense of belonging. And so during those times where I was very depressed and felt that my life did not have meaning or worth, like, faith was the one thing that I stuck to. Because that was the one thing I think in my life that was consistent, despite the fact that I was angry at God. Church was the one thing that was always consistent. Religion was the one thing that was always consistent. And so as I got older, that's what I clung to, because that was basically how I survived. Like, I look back on it, and of course there are problematic belief patterns, but I'm like, I don't think I would have survived any other way.
Gosh, I relate to that a lot.
Especially,
but I think, rewinding back to the puppet ministry, that was actually
we gotta come back to
we
that.
always back to the puppets. We put a bookmark in that. We're coming back. Yeah.
I'm kind of scared.
It all goes back to the puppet ministry.
Because I don't know about this, so tell me
There's a technique. There's a technique.
Oh
Yes,
my.
there's a technique.
You only move the thumb.
Oh my God.
You
only move the thumb?
Puppet ministry.
Only move the thumb. Yep.
Yep, only move the thumb. For us, there was a whole video, super 1970s video, on don't flip your lid.
Yeah.
You gotta
Because
if
you move the upper hand, it looks like your mouth is going.
Golly. Y'all, oh my Lord.
And thinking about those, that community you built and this ongoing dialogue you had, even when you were angry with God, talk a little bit about how your ongoing dialogue with the divine helped you become this community advocate. How did that lead into what you are doing now?
In late high school, early college, I started reading the work of Shane Claiborne. Are you guys familiar with Shane?
Yeah.
We are.
Okay. Yes, so I started reading his book, Irresistible Revolution. And for me, it was like a lot of my conflicts with the church, because I began studying the Bible on my own, and I was a very legalist Christian kid. I would, for example, list all of the fruits of the Spirit, and then in my diary try to measure how well I did on each of those every day. There was a while in high school where I did that.
Wow. With stickers? Do you have stickers? Was there a system?
Color-coded
Did the fruits
highlighters
become veggie tail characters?
Color-coded highlighters.
Wow. That's...
Wow.
Yeah.
I was very serious
scrupulous
about trying to make sure I was doing Christianity right, because I felt that shame and that guilt.
Wow.
And I was trying to alleviate it, because there's also that message that you get of when you trust in God, things will go your way. Good things will happen to you if you trust in God. You're just anxious because you're not trusting God enough. And so I think I kept trying harder and harder in that sense. And so it got to the point where it's like, well, I don't think bad things are happening to me, or I should say that good things are not happening to me. I don't think that's the case, because I'm not a good Christian. Obviously, I have all this evidence at this point that I'm a good Christian.
Let me show you my notebook with my
fruits
of the Spirit.
Right. With my color-coded highlighters and my photo albums with all the, my photo albums with all of the Native kids over here. And,
wow.
I had all of the merit badges and tokens you can have of being a textbook Christian. And I was still anxious and still sad. That was kind of it. But I also noticed, because I was being so legalistic, I would read through the Bible. I was reading it cover to cover, even Leviticus, reading the Bible. And I noticed that a lot of what the church was doing didn't necessarily line up with what Jesus was doing or who God was, right?
You don't say.
Never.
I don't believe it.
And so for me, when I noticed that, it became a matter of, a lot of people notice that eventually, and that's when they leave the church. For me, because the church kept me alive when I otherwise wanted to die, leaving Christianity was not an option. So it was not my construction of who God is or was that was keeping me there. It was the community, right? It was my experience of God. And so when I read Shane Claiborne, it was a lot like reading some of the things that I had been thinking, but he put them into words for me. And from there is kind of where, that's when I dove hard into that study of religion.
Wow.
So I'm in college studying religion, and I'm trying to make sense of these things, because instead of walking away, I coped with my, I guess people call it deconstruction. I coped with deconstruction by study. Instead of saying, this is hypocritical, I'm gonna go now, it was, this doesn't make sense, there has to be a way to make this work, because the way that I have experienced God is too powerful for this not to be true. Or true is kind of a a buzzword once you get into studying philosophy and religion, right? So for this not to be valuable.
Valuable. Yes. Bekah, I'm so in awe of who you are and your resilience and the inner work you've done and the self-awareness you have, and the ways you're knitting this story together. I'm wondering what needs to change as we make this world more accessible. What has got to change?
It's complicated, right? Because you have the structural component and the public policy component, but you also have our human component. And naturally, we are inclined, evolutionarily, if you will, for survival of the fittest. I know, ableism is one of those things where most people do not look down on me in the sense that they think I am worth less than they are. Unless we're talking capitalism, and that's a whole other component, you know? And but most people, I don't like to compare, my struggle to anyone else's, because there's intersectionality and all that. But I often say, like, with racism, it is very vitriolic and full of hatred, right? For ableism, that it's not so much hatred as it is ignorance. And it's not even so much ignorance as in that people are just, it is deep-seated in us that able bodies are better than disabled bodies. And that's not any one person's fault, I think. If you ask other disabled people, they might think differently, but I think that from the very beginning of life, we were taught that it was advantageous, or we learned that it was advantageous to have a body that worked and functioned well. People always think it's fun to ask the question of, like, who would you be in a zombie apocalypse? And for me, I'm always like, I'd be dead in a minute. Are you kidding? I'm like the easiest snack over here. And so, and you say that jokingly, but it's true in the sense of our lizard brains are conditioned to think that the able body is better. That being said, along the way in history and society, that has become more sinister. I think really culminating in the eugenics movement. And you look back on, everyone likes to refer to Hitler in terms of suffering and the worst of the worst, right? But he, like others, had, even physical requirements, measuring people's heads, as far as the Holocaust goes, right? Disabled people were also part of the people. And in any regime, if you look back on history, some disabled people are the first to be kind of cold. That happened with Hitler, but it also happened more recently in the 1980s with Pol Pot. I mean, in any kind of regime where people are valued for the work that they do, manual or otherwise, I mean, disabled people are just the first thing to go. And I don't know how political I should get.
Go for it. Go.
But this is what I had trouble explaining to my parents. My family is conservative, and I actually did not out myself to them as a Democrat until this most recent election. And my mom kind of knew, and my sister kind of knew I was liberal, but the rest of my family, especially my extended family, just had no idea, right? I'm one of the favorite grandchildren because I'm a minister. And then, of course, you have to be like, well, I'm a Democrat minister. So I actually waited until after my ordination to tell my extended family and extended circles that I am a Democrat or a liberal, however you want to phrase that, and that I was not voting for Donald Trump. And I waited after my ordination in hopes of cushioning that blow of, I thought you were a Christian, and Christians don't vote for abortion, I was hoping to cushion that blow a little bit, and maybe it did. I don't know. It's still been a pretty hard road, but one of the things I had trouble explaining to my parents, because I sincerely considered, if Donald Trump gets reelected, like trying to explain to my parents that I am not part of his ideal picture of who is the ideal human. Unless I have money for him or he finds me attractive, like there's no reason, he doesn't, he's on video mocking disabled people.
Right.
Basically, unless you are handicapped, or some people don't like that word, but unless you are disabled because of fighting in a war, Donald Trump does not really care about you.
So what I'm hearing is that we have a change on the policy level and the heart level. And so that leads to our tie-up question that we're going to end every podcast with for our guests. As we take Revs on the road and step outside of the pulpit, we are going to pass the mic to all of our guests. And we want to say, this is your pulpit. What do you want to say to the church today?
I think what I want to say, firstly, the ADA is 30 years old. And if you can't get behind it by now, I just don't understand. I think churches are exempt under some parts of the ADA. The thing that happens most often with churches is that your congregation is aging, and especially in the church today, the majority of congregations are aging. And so accessibility benefits everyone, because you will inevitably become disabled as you age. Whether it's arthritis or whatever else, you are eventually going to need those grab bars or that ramp or that elevator. And yes, it is expensive, but also disabled people make up a good 20 to 25% of the US population. And so when you make your building or your services inaccessible, you are cutting out and leaving out more people than you think you are. And so by making churches accessible is one way to, I think, because a lot of churches take the easy road and say, well, we don't have to do that because we are not required by law. It's funny how much people can still get away with even when it isn't required, or even when it is required by law. You'd be surprised how many people, I'll mention something that's happened to me or something, and they'll say, well, that's illegal. And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you, because people don't.
Yeah.
As much as long as the ADA, as revolutionary as the ADA was and has been, it takes compliance. And I don't expect people to be out there policing compliance. I think that it is a punishment to the church or the business or the institution that refuses to get accessible, because they're excluding a good portion of their potential audience. So whether it's the financial burden of making things accessible or the drop-in numbers. But the other thing is, churches have the urge to create separate programs for disabled children. They'll say, well, we have a special needs class. And a lot of disabled people will take issue with the term special needs, because disabled people's needs are just human needs. Yes, I want to get in and out of a bathtub without dying. Is that special? I don't think so.
It's not a special request. Yeah,
it's not a special request. It shouldn't be a special request to be in an environment where you can be included among your peers. And people say that gets more complicated with, well, this child is difficult, well, this child, I think when you make it a separate class, make it a separate thing, you're doing that isolation thing again. That accommodating yet isolating thing again.
Yeah.
And I'm not asking you to have a whole special class. I am asking you to, I'll go into a Sunday school class where there's clearly a neurodivergent kid or two. And maybe they're throwing a fit because they don't want to use cotton balls on their art project because they don't like the texture, right? And for you, I want you to have childcare workers that aren't writing that out as a disciplinary issue, right?
Right.
I want you to treat these children like children. Children are messy and they can be annoying. But if you make a separate class, make a separate program, you are again denoting that those children are different from their peers, and the other children will notice and say, well, those are the disabled people, they go in a separate class.
Wow. Yeah, so important.
Make sure that your accommodations are not
Wise words.
Be so.
May it be so.
May it be so. Bekah, this has been so valuable and so wonderful to hear from you, and I might have some nightmares about puppets.
Me too.
And I will blame that on you. But
I still get the song stuck in my head all the time.
I'm so grateful that,
shining.
Yes, absolutely. And shine. I hope your face shines brightly. It's shining right now. And
continue to bless the world with your work and your ministry.
Thank you for coming along for the ride today. This has been wonderful.
Glad to be here.
That was beautiful. I'm so glad for those words from Bekah.
Wow.
Jenna, will you close us out with some traveling mercies?
I will. Writers, every week we're going to send you off with a benediction, and this is something that's kind of churchy, but, kind of not. We just want to send you off with a blessing from us. All right, we are sending you off with traveling mercies. Hit the road with a newfound compassion for your own body and the unique bodies of others and the stories they carry. Remember Bekah, her passion and resilience, as you pave new roads in your community that everyone can journey on. Amen.
Amen. That's it for this week's episode of Revs on the Road, produced by Good Faith Media. Stop by at goodfaithmedia.org.
Revs on the Road is sponsored by the Pastoral Residency Program at Wilshire Baptist Church in Dallas.
Don't forget to check out Wilshire's nationally recognized model for excellence in clergy training. Learn more at wilshirebc.org.
Ride along with us,
The Revs, Ashley,
and Jenna on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Revs on the Road.
And give us a honk by liking the podcast on your preferred platform. Next week, we're traveling to Macon, Georgia, where we'll pick up Gloria Cisse and talk about trauma, mental health care, and an amazing new project that she is working on to change the story about mental health care.
Join us as we step out of the pulpit, hit the road, and see what God is up to in the world.
We're not leaving the church. We're just finding it in all kinds of beautiful places.